about this microphone, it didn't work, and I learned you have to pin it onto your lapel to do this. Tonight we're going to talk about world trade. Our speaker is Dr. Syed Anwar. Syed Anwar received his Bachelor of Science in 1973 from the Government College in Lahore, Pakistan, his home city and his home country. He received a Master of Arts degree in Public Administration from the University of the Punjab in Pakistan, his MBA and his doctorate in Business Administration from the United States International University in San Diego, California. Dr. Anwar is currently Associate Professor of Marketing and International Business at the College of Business at West Texas A&M University in Canyon. He has taught at Chapman College and the United States International University, both in San Diego. He has worked as the Deputy Marketing Manager for SA Exports and as Marketing Manager for Chenab Textile Mills Limited in Lahore, Pakistan. He has received 6 research awards and fellowships and other academic honors. He's a member of 9 academic and business societies or associations. If I were to read you the titles of all of Dr. Anwar's publications, research papers, and seminars, there would not be time for him to speak tonight. As a substitute, I counted the number, and there are 56, published both in national and international journals and publications throughout the world. Often unnoticed assets of the Panhandle of Texas include experts like Dr. Anwar, experts of international stature. On a local level, Syed Anwar is a member of the International Club, was a member of the Executive Board of International Week, and is part of the organizing group, the Panhandle International Business Forum. I asked him, could I tell any stories about him? He said, well, the first class he gave at West Texas, young Texas gal put her hand up and said, where are you from? He said, Pakistan. She asked, where is that? He said, Latin America. He felt guilty and corrected where it actually was. Then she wanted to know whether they had electricity in Pakistan. He didn't comment on that, he just talked about camels. He will be talking tonight to us about global marketing and how it affects each of us. But I've also asked him, I'm sure if any of you are interested, that after his talk, he'll answer any question you have about Pakistan. His family is still in Pakistan, and you go there once a year, don't you? Once a year he spends a month in Pakistan and lectures in Lahore to the various business and marketing agents there. It's a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Syed Anwar.
Thank you very much, Paul, for your nice introduction. I'm pretty honored. I'm going to use all this high-tech stuff, so I haven't used it before, so if I make a mistake, please forgive me. Is it okay? All right, we are going to talk about international marketing and international business. But first of all, let me introduce you to some of the things we have in at West Texas A&M University. For the last, I came here in 1987, and in the last 6 years, we have introduced at least 4 new courses in international business. And you'll be surprised to know that last year, we started offering international business concentration in the Department of Management, Marketing and General Business. And this concentration is only offered by the West Texas A&M University. Even at Texas Tech, they don't have some of the courses which we offer. Some of my students have gone to Thunderbird. Some of my students have gone to Texas A&M College Station and University of Texas Austin. So I believe in terms of international business, we have started such a nice program because in today's world, it's a virtual reality. You can't escape from this. Any country you go to, even Mr. Eimon has gone to many countries in the world, and we talk about all the things. Once in a while you go to a country, and in all the small villages, you will be surprised that you will find products from the United States. You will find products from Japan. You will find products from Taiwan, Hong Kong, all these countries. Even if you go to Europe, any country. So international business is the name of the game, and if you do not capitalize on international business education or international business or in terms of exporting, I think you will be left behind. And the thing is, you have to start right now. After this brief discussion, let me show you the topics I'll be going to discuss tonight. I'll have a basic introduction, and then I will talk about international business and global trade. I will also give you the concept of borderless world, what are the issues and new trends involved, sources of comparative advantage and consumption spillovers, why there is so much consumer convergence going on in today's world. You'll be surprised to know when I talk about consumer convergence, I'm talking about the lifestyles and all the eating patterns and the way people spend their lives. They are converging. It's not diverging, but it's converging. You go to Europe, you will find people wearing your Levi's 505. You go to Europe, you will find people eating your Baskin and Robbins. There are more than 900 McDonald's only in Japan. Hard to believe. There are more than 60 McDonald's in Hong Kong. It's such a small island. So what are we talking about? International consumer convergence. And that is part of the game in today's international business. Basic introduction of international business is when you sell your goods and services across your national border. You are from this country, you are from the state of Texas, or you are from the Panhandle, Texas, or even in Amarillo. You will be surprised that there are many corporations or many companies selling their products, goods and services to other countries. So you are dealing with international business. Why do we call it borderless world? There's one gentleman by the name of Kenichi Ome. He's out of Japan, and he invented this word. It's called borderless world. He believes that in terms of economics and business, we don't have any borders. In today's world, you do maintain your political sovereignty, you do maintain your political status, but in terms of international trade, the whole world is becoming just one world. And that's why we don't have any countries left. And that's why we call it borderless, and his name is Kenichi Ome. He also wrote a couple of books. I believe these must be available in this library. There's another gentleman from Japan, because Japan is my favorite research topic. His name is Akio Morita. I don't know, you must be familiar with Akio Morita or not. You use his products all the time. It's one of the top-notch corporations in today's world. It's called Sony Corporation. Akio Morita is the person who came to this country in 1958, and he bought a technology for $50,000. It was called semiconductor or transistor. At that time, people thought, it's a junk. It's not usable. And what he did was, he was smart. He paid $60,000, and look what happened. Rest is all history. Today, Japan, they control 60% of your semiconductor industry. It's a $60 billion industry worldwide, where Japan's market share is 60%. So basically, it's all part of the international business, and that is, if you can find your niche, if you know how to use your competitive edge, you can have all the market share in today's world. You don't have to be a big corporation like General Motors and IBM. You can be a small corporation and you will still maintain your market share in today's world. I'll give you a very simple example. General Motors is 128 or 130 billion dollar corporation. Very big corporation. The biggest corporation in today's world. It's very simple to say 132 billions. If you look at Pakistan's budget, it's about $40 billion. So you can imagine how big the General Motors is. But General Motors cannot satisfy this $300 billion market of today's global market auto industry. So what you do is there are many companies, maybe Sweden's Saab or Sweden's Volvo. All these little bitty companies, they do have some market share. So my point here is that you can have a market share and it is called your niche. And niche in marketing we defined as your competitors' weaknesses can become your strengths. But the thing is, you have to operationalize your strategies. People make strategies every day, every month. Strategies, they look great on a piece of paper. But when you come down to implementation, 60% of your plans, they fail. And the reason is because people do not know how to operationalize. We all make all big plans. And then when it comes down to implementation in your personal life also, you have all the plans, but you really cannot achieve. So in today's world, if you are able to operationalize your strategy in a timely fashion, and I'm going to talk about under sources of competitive advantage, that's the name of the game in today's international business. I also talked about issues and new trends. What's happening in today's world, and after that I'll come to the Panhandle, Texas. Why international business is so important, and why do we have to be so vigilant? Because if you do not protect your market share, if you do not go and aggressively seek all the markets, somebody else will. One simple example is Japan's total trade surplus with you last year was $40 billion. So for the last, I believe, 10-15 years, they have been accumulating about $60 billion net surplus. So you can add all this amount, it's a lot of money. But the reason is they know how to market their products. But then many people, and especially media, they will blame your corporations that we are not good in international business and we don't do this and that. Let me tell you tonight one thing. And it's very important, I tell my students all the time, there are many American corporations, they are extremely competitive in today's world. The problem is media doesn't talk about those corporations. And the reason? Because media will always tell you something which is negative. They never talk about something which brings you money or something which is positive. Few examples here. Coca-Cola Corporation. We drink Coke almost every day. It's one of the biggest and one of the best known brands in today's world. 70% of Coke's revenues are coming from their other markets, overseas markets. Boone Corporation, 60% of the revenues come from other countries. And there are so many other examples. You go to any country and you want to buy a Kodak film, it is available, it has the same quality, same package, same color. Of course, the language may be different. So what do we have here? Of course, Kodak is the best corporation in terms of its market share. And then there are so many other corporations, 3M. 3M is a very small corporation, according to GM. But look at the products they sell, and they have their best market share. So I can go on and on, but the thing is, you have to understand that this country is still very good in terms of its competitive edge. You still make many products which nobody can make or manufacture in today's world. But the thing is, media always talks about those things where you have some of the weaknesses. So that's the reason I just wanted to clarify that you can seek a competitive advantage under any area. You don't have to be a big corporation. A small corporation from Amarillo can go anywhere in the world if they have the right product, right time, right price, right advertising. They will capture their market. You can sell your ideas, you can sell your products, you can sell your services. And it's happening all over the world. So sources of competitive advantage cannot be maintained forever. That's another problem. You have to upgrade and update your sources of advantage, and sometimes you lose your sources of advantage. And any country you go to, it's impossible, out of question, to have sources of advantage in every area. And the reason is because today's world is very, very competitive. You look at your history, England was a big superpower in 1700 and 1800. By the middle of 1800, they had lost everything. And then after that, America became one of the big economic powers by the end of 1800 and early 1900. So the reason is sources of competitive advantage is always changing. If you go to Hong Kong or Taiwan or Thailand, any country you name, you must have traveled, all of you must have traveled, you will be surprised that sources of competitive advantage is always visible. The only problem is we do not know how to capitalize on our sources of advantage. So coming back to the Panhandle, Texas, you do have a lot of sources of advantages. But sometimes we do not have the right coordination, right support, right help. And that's where we lack. Starting by looking at my last topic on this page, consumption spillovers and consumer convergence. We live in a world which I tell my students all the time, it's a world of MTV. It's a world of MTV, you watch MTV, it's a world of CNN. You go to Austria, you go to Australia, you will be surprised you can never escape from this reality. It's always following you. You stay in any hotel, anywhere in Europe, even in Africa, Latin America, CNN people are there. For some time I did not have a cable television. My dad used to tell me all the time, look what happened in America today. You had a big flooding going on. And I told him, I don't have a CNN. Because to some extent I hated, sometimes television. The only television program I like is my favorite one, Paul and McNeil Lara News Hour and Nightline. So you see, the thing is, I also tell my students that always keep fighting, and that is fight prime time. Read something. Read something because that's where we land. In your country, other day somebody was giving me very interesting statistics that on the average in this country, students or mostly teenagers, they watch 4 to 6 hours, average, every day. They just watch one thing called one-eyed monster. It's your television. And then if you look at some other countries, most of the time students, they like to read. Of course, there are some good advantages and disadvantages. But going back to our discussion, we live in a world which is called consumer spillovers, consumption spillovers, consumer convergence. And that is good for you because any country you go to, you can sell your product. And that's why consumer convergence can happen in eatable items, it can happen in industrial products, it can happen in your agricultural products, because people, they have the need. You will be surprised that you are the biggest exporter of grains. And the biggest buyer, I believe, is Russia. Previously it was Soviet Union. And you'll be also surprised to know that people who will ship your grains to Russia, these are not American corporations, these are Japanese trading companies. And going back to my comparative advantage, Japanese trading companies, their comparative advantage did not start in 1980s. If you look at Mitsui and Mitsubishi, they are almost 50 to 60 or almost 100 years old. So comparative advantage can be maintained, can be nourished, as long as you have the right resources. And that's what I wanted to tell you, that in today's global world, consumer convergence is the name of the game, and if you know how to sell your product by standardizing your product, like a Kodak film I told you, any country you go to, you will always find it in the drugstores or in the supermarkets. Why? Because it's a standardized product and it's your comparative edge. Let me go to the next topic, and I just wanted to show you some data. The reason I talk about important data is in today's world, the total world trade stands at about $3 to $4 trillion. And they say that by the year 2000, it's going to go beyond $7 to $8 trillion. So what are we looking at? We are looking at more and more consumers, a lot of goods and services exported and imported. So it means it's a whole convergence going on, and you also know that there is no Cold War. Cold War is over, but but we do have one problem in today's world. When I go back to my Japanese surplus, $40 billion with your country. Today we have one problem, it's called economic war. So Cold War has taken a new shape, and that is called economic war. So down the road after 10 years, you will have a lot of economic wars, and if you cannot capitalize on your comparative edge, it means you may lose your economic war. Economic wars are very difficult to manage because countries, they like to protect themselves. And of course, it has to do with the politics and sociology and economics. So today's world, the trade is about 3 to 4 trillion. Every day, about 250 to 300 billion dollars change hands in all the major capital centers of today's world. So now you can imagine 250 to 300 billion. It's very easy to say, but when you look at and when you count all the dollars, it's a lot of money. So what are we looking at? It's all the electronic transfers, and it's a big world. In 1950, the US share of world gross domestic product was 50%. So it means in 1950, the US was taking care of the whole world. But if you look at 1992, your total share of the global GDP is only 20%. And it means that you have a lot of other competitors. And that's where you have to fight really hard. That's where you have to aggressively seek your markets. Otherwise, because markets, as far as I'm concerned, and I teach my students all the time, markets do not come to you. It's very simple. You have to go and explore your markets, and markets once lost, very seldom they come back. You must have seen it. Very few products, I can tell you some examples where those companies were able to recapture their market share. One product you can look at is it's called Tylenol. Due to some of the blunders they had in early mid-80s, Tylenol was the only corporation they were able to recapture their market share. The other company we look at is Coca-Cola. They not only recaptured market share, but they started to beat Pepsi so bad that Pepsi got out of this Coca-Cola business for a long, long time, and Pepsi is the biggest restaurant owner. So all these things are part of the overall competitive strength. In 1992, total US exports about $450 billion versus imports of $532 billion. In 1950s and 60s, even in 70s, you had a trade surplus with many countries. But after mid-1970s and early 80s, things started to change. And of course, the reasons are that it's not that this country is not competitive. The reasons are because some countries are not playing a fair game. And I'll come back to this point because if you look at some countries like Kairetsu system in Japan, Korean Chibols, and all the European community, they are getting together so they can protect their markets. And there has to be some reason. So it means that some countries are not adopting all the fair trade practices. So if you have unfair trade practices on the part of some countries, that's where you lose your market share. And of course, all these trade conflicts, they have to be negotiated. You cannot have a unilateral action. If somebody bans your beef, for how long? I mean, if somebody says that you had hormones and they ban your beef, of course it had to be negotiated, and it was negotiated. So you live in a world which I tell my students all the time, it's an interdependent world, highly coordinated. You cannot isolate yourself, you cannot separate yourself. The whole world, countries, they need each other in terms of overall business practices and products and goods and services. So this was a very basic data on the total world trade. Let's look at some of the panhandle data because we need to know what's happening in this part of the country. It's very interesting that, of course, our main competitive asset is agriculture. Area agriculture results in 2 billion of value-added production, 4 million fed cattle, and 25 commercially grown crops in this region every year. The High Plains area produced 79% of the state-fed beef and 39% of the wheat crop in 1991. So very important data. 10 million in economic activity generated by the High Plains, and over 100,000 jobs are created in Texas due to our economic growth. So this is extremely important. Why? Because you produce most of the products, and of course jobs are created. Can we channel this data and can we channel this economic activity and export some of our products? Absolutely. And I think Paul and I were discussing last time, your wheat producers and your beef producers, they all export. In fact, most of their merchandise and most of their products are exported every day. And that's our asset and that's our comparative edge. But of course, it took us a long time to maintain and to capitalize on this comparative edge. It did not happen in one day. Because one thing is extremely critical. Once you maintain your comparative edge, it may disappear anytime. But it's going to take you a long time to capitalize on your comparative edge. And comparative edge could be in the form of human resources, cheaper capital, your marketing skills, your distribution skills, your logistics skills, the way you use your people, the way you have capital investment, all these things. Comparative edge can be under any form. And that's the name of the game in today's international business. Let's look at some of the products and services and some of the potential markets for the Panhandle. What are the products and goods and services we have here? I explained to you that mostly agriculture, and of course we have some industrial products exported to other countries. What are the regions and markets to target in today's world, especially from the Panhandle, Texas? Of course, Japan is the second biggest market in today's world. The biggest market in today's world is US, of course, $5.1 trillion. And Japanese market stands at 3.0 or $3.1 trillion. And 20 years ago, Japan was not among the first 10 markets of today's world. And look what happened in 10 years. In the last 10, 15 years, they have done such a wonderful job. But again, you have to look at their side of the story. Why? Because their comparative edge did help them, and due to some unfair practices, which we read and which we watch all the time on the newspaper. So Japan will be one of your potential markets. The problem in the Japanese market is that their distribution structure is all messed up. And in layman's term, when you have a multi-channel and multi-layered distribution structure, it means it will add cost to your product. So how can you simplify Japanese distribution? Over there, they have one system called large-scale retail store law. If you want to apply for a grocery store more than 10,000 square feet, historically it took you about 6 to 7 years to get permission. Okay, in this country, it's like this. Why? Because you are trying to create something which will help you bring jobs. In the Japanese market, the distribution structure is, overall, it's called a welfare system. Welfare system is, it was an island nation, they needed a lot of middlemen, and middlemen, they were relying on all the daily consumption, and when you buy your consumption like fish and all the, all these things you look at. In Europe also, people sometimes they buy every day, maybe due to the freshness and all these things. In this country, you can't afford that, because when you have a mass scale consumption, you have to go to the grocery store once a week. So this can create a problem, but there are ways to penetrate into the Japanese market. And as I said before, that if the market is difficult and people they say, oh, I can't deal with it, the strategy is not to withdraw. The strategy is not to maintain status quo. The strategy is how to deal with your market, how to create new innovative strategies, how to change your tactics. And that's the name of the game. So you can go for piggyback, you can use as a somebody as a distributor, or you can go to the Japanese market, and there are ways to sell your products in the Japanese market. 7-Eleven got bankrupt in this country, and they were bought by one of the Japanese corporations, the Southland Corporation. And there are more than 3,000 7-Elevens in Japan right now. And they are also trying to go to other Asian markets. And the reason is because if you have your product failed in this country, it means that you are not going to stop manufacturing. You take your product, you take your sample, your quality, your package, everything, and you start selling in other countries. And that's what we teach in international marketing and international business, and that is, once you have your decline, it's not an end. You have to go to other countries and try to explore your other markets. So there are so many American corporations very, very successful in the Japanese market. Couple of examples, again, McDonald's Corporation. They have more than 35 25% of the market share. Okay. Here we talk about sushi all the time, and we say Japanese will never love your fast food. You know, when you sell fast food, of course, you are selling to some extent all the grease. And what happened is, how do you convince Japanese consumers that they also buy the same fast food? Of course, there are some techniques, there are some strategies, and McDonald's is one of the best corporations in terms of their marketing strategy. The second company I was going to talk about, it's called Schick Razor Blades. It's hard to believe that Schick, they have 60% of the Japanese market, and that the way they sell their products, and I told you about 7-Eleven, and there are so many other products we can talk about. So Japanese market is not a closed market. You must know how to manage. The second market, of course, the China week just ended, and we all know that it's an awakening giant. 1.2 billion people. China is a big market, but we have to be careful in one thing, and that is people will tell you that China, oh, of course, 1.2 billion consumers. But you have to be careful, and that is 1.2 billion consumers are not ready to consume your product. Out of 1.2 billion consumers, maximum there are 100 or 200 million consumers ready to purchase. Because in China also you have a lot of unequal distribution, all the income disparities. So you have to go to the coastal regions in order to sell your products. The central China is still very poor. The per capita income about $700 to $800. But if you go to the coastal belt, the per capita income is very, very high, about 2,000 per person. In fact, in that region, you will see many people driving Mercedes. And the reason is because it's a booming market, of course, but you have to be careful and you have to find the right customer. The third market, which is in our neighborhood, and that is called North American Free Trade area. And it includes Canada, of course, Mexico and US. And it's going to be the biggest economic area. Of course, it has to be ratified by the US Congress after negotiations. And there are some problems. You read all the time in the newspaper, environmental problems and all these. But one thing I can tell you, and this is my own opinion, and that is, it's a big market. You have 80 million potential consumers, and it's your next door neighbor. And it's a big market, and the moment this market is open, you will have a lot of opportunities. And the only thing is we have to wait and see, and I believe all the trade tariff barriers will come down, but again, it may come down between 1 to 15 years. Don't expect that the tariff barriers will be coming down in 1 year. There are some tariff barriers, they will be eliminated maybe in the next 10 to 15 years. So you have to have some transition phase, just like US-Canada Free Trade Agreement, which was concluded in 1989. The fourth market, and it's another potential market, it's called Eastern Europe, huge market. But the problem is there are some internal conflicts going on, and you can read all the time, you know, what's happening in Bosnia and Serbia and Yugoslavia and all these. It will take some time. See, one of the problems in marketing is that companies, they always go for the short route. They always try to capitalize on the short-term strategy, and that is how to make money today. It doesn't happen. And we have discussed before in my classes and with Mr. Eimon, exports and international business, it takes a lot of patience. And things may not happen. You may have to wait maybe a couple of years, or maybe 6 months or 8 months. But once you maintain and once you capture your market share, that's your asset. So once you start selling your products, of course, it's an open market. But the thing is, you have to negotiate. And in some countries, the negotiation process will take a long time. Mr. Stupi can add, it takes a long, long time. The experts will agree with me that in this country, you know, we say time is money. This country, the mainstream American culture says, you have to be a good achiever, time is money, let's get down to business, let's conclude, and that's it. In other countries, it doesn't happen. You go to China, you go to Japan, they have to conclude in a way that they include everybody from the organization. Sometimes it takes months. So you have to be very, very patient. Why? Because we are accustomed to our own culture, and that is, let's not waste time. In other countries, it may not happen. They are looking at one thing called human element. And that's the name of the game in other cultures. In China, you say guanski. Guanski is the right contact. If you don't have the right contact, you will never capture the right market share. The fourth market, which is already there, and American corporations and panhandle companies are already exporting to this, and I don't, EC 1992. EC stands for European Community. 1992 was that by December 31st, 1992, they harmonized all the standards. They have implemented about 90% of the rules and regulations, and it's a big market. But the problem is, in some areas, EC is also becoming very, very protectionist. They don't want you to capture their market. They want to keep all the things to themselves. These are 12 countries, and in future, by the year 2000, we believe that they will have about 6 more countries coming from Scandinavia, plus Austria. So these will be 18 countries, and they had already negotiated the European Economic Area. It's the biggest area. So you have to watch out, because as a big corporation, you are already selling to the European community for a long, long time. For a mid-sized and small corporation, you have to have the right strategy in order to penetrate into the European community. How about developing countries? Developing countries, another huge market. But again, it's going to take some time. If you look at Africa, and if you look at all the Southeast Asia and South Asia, and of course including Middle East, it's a market. The market is there, but in some areas we do have some problems. And according to one estimate, and I was reading the other day a very interesting data, all the developing countries, they plan to invest $600 billion by the year 2000. Because all the countries, now they are trying to compete in today's global world, and they are trying to fix their transportation, they are trying to fix all the logistics, all the roads, all the bridges. So what are we looking at? And that's where American corporations are very, very competitive. Construction, all the heavy-duty industrial products, and it's a huge market which is going to be developed in the next 5-6 years. I tell you one thing, lately General Electric made a $1 billion contract with some country. I think it was with Thailand or China. Your Pacific Bell, or maybe one of the Bell companies, they had a huge project in Mexico. The problem in the developing world is they have one thing called political problems. Political problem is the main thing. If you don't have a political stability, nobody will invest in your country. See, if I come to Amarillo and if I invest $100 million, and today if you have a lot of political crisis, I won't invest $100 million for 2 years. I'm going to invest $100 million for another 30 years. You look at all IBM and General Motors and all the big corporations, 60% of your foreign investment is in the Western Europe. And the reason is because political stability, and vice versa. More than 80% of their investment is in your country. Because, of course, political stability. And it took you about 100 years to fix this country, and it took them about 100 years. But if you go to one country where there is no political stability, I think you should be careful. And these are the things we always look at in terms of developing world. So these are some of the things in terms of the global markets and the panhandle. Very quick explanation why companies they don't export. You have so many companies from panhandle, there has to be some reason. Sometimes they really don't export. Some people say, they don't have any interest, or maybe they are too much occupied with the local market, which is to some extent correct. But there are some other reasons which we always neglect. And that is, when you cannot maintain your quality, nobody will buy your product. Because some countries are so picky that if you are not able to maintain the right quality, you will lose your market share. I'm not talking about big corporations like IBM and Kodak and Xerox. They all have huge market share. I'm talking about mid-sized and small businesses. You have to be very careful if you want to capture and maintain the right market share, and that is quality. The second thing is lack of competitive products. Maybe you don't have the right homework done. You don't have the right competitive product. The third one is weak, slow response to the marketplace. There was an opportunity in Japan or Taiwan and you were not able to go, somebody else captured your market share. So what does it mean? It means you have to have the right intelligence. You have to have the right competitive system where you monitor your markets, what's happening in other countries. The fourth one is unresponsive customer service. You have to have the right customer service. And the fifth one is slow response to value marketing. What is value marketing? Value marketing is, even if you buy a 60-cent Taco Bell, from Taco Bell you buy a Taco Bell, you do expect one thing, and that is called value. Because if you don't have the right value, you won't buy it. You go to any McDonald's in this country, at least 90% the coffee will taste the same. So what are we looking at? Basic value. It doesn't matter if you have a $100,000 product or 60-cent product. In today's world, and especially in this country and Western Europe and Japan, people are mostly very, very careful, and that is, they want to make a strategy based on value, and value will protect your market share. And then the last one is profit maximization versus long-term market share. Many corporations, especially small business and mid-size, the first thing they do is they say how to make money today and do not protect our market share tomorrow. But in the name of the game in international businesses, you have to seek your long-term market share. You may reduce your profit. And that's what Japanese, their magic formula had been historically. How to capture your market share? When you look at your Sony Corporation, in 1970 they started to dump all the televisions in this country. And it was one of the excellent dumping cases. Nitron, the famous television they created, it was a great technology. And the purpose was that how to capture market share. They did have a lot of losses. But then today, if you look at Sony Corporation, they have all the market share. Of course, dumping is also illegal. You have to be careful. But my point is, go for the long-term strategy, not for the short-term. And my final part of this tonight's discussion is, again, continuation of the things we just discussed. Seek long-term strategy, and this is what recommended to mostly small businesses and medium-sized companies. Always go for the long-term strategy. Find your niche or competitive edge, which I explained before. And that is, your competitors' weaknesses can become your strength. A Boeing Corporation cannot sell these small Cessna planes. And Boeing Corporation cannot sell Learjets. Somebody has to capitalize on your market share. Okay? Do your homework. And in this case, I have a very interesting thing. And Paul and I call myself a library parasite. Why? Because library is the most important. I tell my students, you can find anything in the library. If you want to export a product, don't go to all the consultants. Go to your library. I'm not talking about even WT. I'm talking about public library right here. And what do you find over there? All the data banks, networks, all these things. And you do your market research. The U.S. Commerce Department, they had I think, huge amount of data available right in this library. The only thing is, of course, it needs your imaginations and skills to use all the one-eyed monster, the deal which you have in front of you. It takes some time, it takes some energy, it takes some skill. But start from your library. Believe me, it will help you. Seek rigid quality standards, which we discussed before, because quality is one of the areas which will backfire. If you cannot provide the right quality, by just reducing your prices will not help. Because I told you that when you talk about the value marketing concept, if you sacrifice your quality, you are history. And there are so many companies we can talk about in today's world. They did not take care of the quality. And look what happened, they are already gone. I have a very interesting example for you. Most of you know what Yugo is. Yugo Corporation, they started selling cars in this country. I don't know if somebody drives Yugo in this, if you go to Dallas on your Yugo, I think I will sit and I will pray for you. Because, or if Yugo is going on a road, you have to dodge its path because of the falling path. That's what I'm talking about. Quality is the most important element. Look at some of the automobile models we have. Toyota Corolla is more than 25 years old. Then you have Mustang, which is already 30 years old. And it's still surviving, it's still very strong. The only thing they did was excellent quality. You know, if you look at Lexus, today's Lexus, I tell my students all the time, the technology is about 8 years ahead of its competitors. Even Mercedes-Benz and BMW, they agreed that Lexus is at least 6 to 8 years ahead of its competitors. But it did not happen. They had a planned strategy. You can buy a Lexus for $45,000, and if you want to buy the same type of options on Mercedes, you will pay more than $90,000. So what is Lexus doing? They are trying to capture its long-term market share. They are not concerned with the immediate profitability. So this is what you have to do when you go to other countries. Always go for the long term. But of course, it has to deal with one thing, and that is your financial strength. Every company cannot sacrifice their profit and go for the long-term strategy. And then we have keep in close touch with your customers. How do you do that? Use one simple thing, that is called fax. And fax is saving us so much money in today's world. It's hard to believe that you can't even finish your coffee early morning if you send a fax to Japan, Tokyo. And the person over there can't even finish his coffee, and they will send you fax back. It took you 5 minutes, you don't have to go to Federal Express, so how much time you save? You send something to Germany, it's in somebody's hand over 30 seconds. So is it a technology, is it a technological revolution? Does it help in terms of exports? Absolutely. Paul and I all the time communicate in terms of our faxes, and sometimes it helps a lot. I don't have to come to Amarillo. Imagine how much time I save. So fax is the most important. The next strategy I will strongly recommend, if you can afford it, attend your trade shows. The U.S. Commerce Department, they have a whole list of all the trade shows for this country's exporters. You can go to Mexico, you can go to this country, all the cities, and maybe overseas. Because if you have to find your customers, you have to find your distributors first. You really can't go and sell your products. You have to have the right distributor who can aggressively push your products. And you can meet those people by going to the right trade shows. As I said, they may be expensive, but I think it's a worth pursuing. Put speed in your products. That's a very interesting strategy. Even small businesses and mid-sized companies can do that. I'll just make a very simple analogy here. Honda Corporation and GM. Historically, it takes about 5 to 6 years, and maybe 5 years now, for GM to bring one automobile from their lab to the dealership. For Honda, it took about 4 years. So Honda was about 1 year ahead of Toyota. So what are we looking at? Speed. And speed could be in terms of speed of innovation, speed of commercializing, speed of marketing, and speed of anything. As long as you can keep some speed in your product and you can put some speed in your product, it will be great. You will stay ahead of your customers and you will competitors, and you can stay ahead of all the markets. Turn managers into entrepreneurs. This is an interesting strategy, and entrepreneurs are always risk seekers. Why do we need to look at this strategy? Because the old concept of management is completely dead and obsolete. That's what we talk about all the time. You see, the old concept of management was that I work for my company, they will take care of me, and I don't need to bother. Why should I bother? They will pay my salary. Today's management concept says you have to take responsibility. Even if I'm a loader, if I'm a Federal Express employee, I'm delivering packets every day. I'm part of the corporation. And it's another concept, we call it, it's called financial engineering and financial management. And that is, you have to take responsibility. You are part of a small subsystem. So don't blame on your main boss. See, that's what it came from Japan, and that is, if something goes wrong in my corporation, I will always blame Washington, D.C. You have to blame on your corporation. And very few companies are able to do that. And you have to find, and you have to take responsibility. And of course, this concept came from Japan, and I think it's working pretty good. So turn managers into entrepreneurs. Managers, they don't normally seek risk, but entrepreneurs, they are very, very risk oriented. They always seek risk, and of course they always fail also. But then it's a risk-taking environment. You really can't expect all the wonderful things and still make money. It's just all the time risk-taking strategies. The second last one is seek strategic alliances, piggyback arrangements, networking. In this group, we have some networking. Some people met somebody and they had a network. But in companies, networking is you have to piggyback, you have to use, you have to collaborate. Today's business formula is your competitor is your friend. If you can't beat your competitor, you should join them. There are thousands of collaborative alliances going on, and it can happen you can also do it as a small or mid-sized company. Somebody will ask me one question, why do we need to seek collaborative alliances? Because you may lose your market share, you may lose your research capabilities, somebody will steal your products. And then my answer is because in order to survive in today's world, you have to seek collaboration. Okay? Some of the examples I will give you, you will be surprised. Toyota and GM, these are two huge corporations. Toyota is number 6 in today's world, GM is number 1. They hate each other because in some markets they really don't like each other. But you will be surprised that in the last 10 years in Fremont, California, they manufacture cars together for the last 10 years, and their manufacturing facility is called NUMI, United Motors Manufacturing Industries. If you look at today's Ford Escort, the engine was developed by Mazda. If you look at Mitsubishi Corporation, they have a huge collaboration going on with Chrysler Corporation. If you look at today's 747 jumbo jet, you will be amazed that there is so much collaboration. The landing gear is coming from Italy. The wings are coming from China. The tail section is manufactured in Canada. I mean, most of you know these things. It's amazing. And this is all part of collaboration. And that is, if you want to go alone, it's extremely expensive. Why? Because you can't afford, if the product fails, you will be all flat, you will be gone. So you have to seek and you have to diversify your risk. And collaboration is the only way to do it. If you can't seek collaboration, then you can also go for piggyback. Piggyback is use somebody in other countries and they can push your products. That is also a very old strategy. The last one is arrangements, network arrangements. What are the network arrangements? Networks are an extension of strategic alliances. The only difference in networks is that it could be under any capital arrangement, marketing alliance, distribution alliance, anything. So these are all interchangeable words. The purpose is how to collaborate and create 2 plus 2 5, which is called synergy. And this is the name of the game, and as a small company and as a mid-sized company, you can also do that. It's extremely recommended to the small businesses, especially in the Panhandle, Texas. And the last strategy I have for the Panhandle businesses, you can also use counter trade. In counter trade, it's a very complex. There are different types of counter trade, but in old days, the only counter trade was barter. And that was, you give me your shoes, I give you my shirts, you give me your grain, I give you whatever. People exchange products. There was no monetary transaction. But in today's world, counter trade is very complex. If you look at Pepsi Corporation, they are one of the biggest vodka distributors in this country. And they are selling colas to the Russians and Soviet Union. Okay? But they did not get any money because Soviets and Russians, they did not have any money. No convertible currency. So what did they do? They got all the vodka and they delivered this vodka to somebody else, and the person is selling all the vodka in this country, so they are the biggest distributor. So this is one of the reasons counter trade is extremely important. I told you that today's world $3 to $4 trillion big, and according to some rough estimates, counter trade constitutes, and it's hard to believe, 8 to 15% of your world trade. Boeing corporations, they sell planes to Romania and to Saudis. In return, they get different products. It doesn't matter. They will hire a middleman, he will get rid of all the products, and here I'm going to get all my money. Okay? So counter trade can be done from the Panhandle, Texas. You can have a counter trade in terms of agricultural products. I believe there was one corporation a couple of years ago, they were dealing. The problem in counter trade is you cannot fix your price. The problem in counter trade, somebody may lose money. The problem in counter trade, you cannot monitor your quality because there is no worldwide organization which is going to monitor your counter trade transactions. That's the only problem. And in some areas, counter trade is so complex that there are 6 to 15 companies at a time involved in a counter trade. But still, counter trade is one of the strategy, and that is, in order to lose your market share, just deal with counter trade. Of course, there are some problems, but you have to deal and manage your problem. And that's why we have to use the right tactics and strategies. So these are all my different strategies and today's global trade. And that is, You cannot escape from this reality. Many students, they come to me and they say, why do we need to interact with the outside world? We are the biggest superpower. We are an independent nation. There is no need. And then I tell them, okay, tell me, where do you buy your Nike shoes or Reebok shoes? Okay? If you have all these little bitty kids, they come home, they make a nightmare for their mom and dad. Why? Because they can't be accepted in their peers, right? They have to buy the right Nike and Reebok on the same day. But I ask them, where do you buy? They say Westgate Mall. But where do they manufacture? 99% are manufactured in Taiwan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong. Why don't you manufacture here? Because cheap labor. Okay, so these are all the things we have to. So do we live in a world trade? Absolutely. There are thousands and thousands of products you can look at from this country. If you don't sell to other countries, many companies will go bankrupt in this country. So we only look at some of the negative things told by media, but we don't look at one thing, and that is 20%. I'm not talking about 5%. 20% of your national output is exported every year. Calculate 20% of your $5 trillion. It's a lot of money we are talking about. So now you know why we need international business or global trade. Because if you do not deal, or if you just believe that it's redundant, somebody else will capitalize on your markets. And the thing is, I told you, you live in an economic world, you will have economic wars, you have to stay active. And markets, once lost, really don't come back to you. And markets don't come to you, you have to explore your own markets. So we live in a global world, we have to depend on our global world. And today's global world is extremely interconnected. But it doesn't mean that you don't have any problems. There are a lot of problems in Eastern Europe, in Africa, all these. The thing is, you have to manage and you have to negotiate and you have to seek remedies. Problems will not go and leave you on their own. Problems, they need to be managed properly. And this is why we need international business. And to make my lecture, to conclude my lecture tonight, I do have some literature on those tables. On September 10th, we are conducting a pretty big seminar at West Texas A&M University, and I will strongly recommend you. The title of this seminar will be Export Strategies and International Business. So we will have the same discussion, and it will be a one-day seminar, and we have invited a lot of good speakers, including Mr. Eimon. And this is what we are going to spend all day and discussing the same issues. We have invited people from the state of Texas, Austin, and we have invited people from Dallas, and we have invited people from Lubbock, all the management specialists, and they will just tell us how to be more competitive in international business. This was my lecture, and I'll open this floor for your discussion. Thank you.
Will you say something about the North American Free Trade Association?
Well, I explained before, North American Free Trade Agreement is a win-win strategy. The reason I call it win-win strategy because you need Mexico and they need you. Those days are gone when you said that Mexico needed you. Of course not. It's a huge market for you. And if you don't take care of this market, somebody else will. And of course, they will need you also. In some areas, you may lose your market share. Absolutely. Because I said, in order to go through this transition, which will take about 5 to 6 years, these are all trade-offs. But after 5-10 years, if you look at the overall impact, it is a win-win strategy. Many companies, because you harmonize your trade barriers, all the elimination of tariffs and everything, so then product will be your consumer, and they will save money. So again, going back to the thing which I said, consumer convergence. It all happened due to the consumer convergence. It's a win-win strategy. I think it's good for the country. You have to, of course, overcome a lot of obstacles, which is being discussed in these days. Environment, pollution, all the cheap labor. You have to deal with those issues.
Will Japan change for trade with exports to Japan from the rest of the world?
Absolutely. If you look at today's yen, in fact, there was a big cry, and lately all the G7, a group of 7 countries, including US and Australia and Canada, all these countries, they have to intervene in the international markets to control the Japanese yen, because Japanese, they just cried. They just told you that, come on guys, it's too much. The Japanese yen has appreciated too much, you have to help us. So I think there was some intervention, and according to one estimate, and I was watching yesterday this news, according to one estimate, Japanese trade surplus will start to decline after a couple of years. Again, the world trade is so big, it doesn't happen in 1 week. You have a lot of commitments. But gradually it will decline, and still they will keep some sort of trade surplus, no question about it. Because it's one of the booming market, and Japanese, they have one thing going on, they will start to import more because they are going through the same period where you people were in 1960s, and they have one thing called consumer affluence. They are buying everything. The consumers, they have so much savings. You go to Europe, they spend all their money in Italy and France, and they come here, and so the reason is due to this consumer affluence and consumer convergence. When they import more than their exports, of course their trade surplus will decline. But again, we have to be patient because it's going to take at least 3 to 4 years. And they will start to spend more on their defense. So that will also have a bigger impact on their exports. And they have a plan to spend about 90 billion to 120 billion on their infrastructure. And their economy also collapsed a couple of times in the last 3 years. Because see, Japan, they don't have one thing but you people have. In this country, you had in 1987, you had an October crash when the whole market crashed, and in one day you lost trillions of dollars, okay? But the country did not break down, right? Why? Because it was a peanut. You have a lot of shock absorbers. Other countries, they don't have that. It was just 4 to 5% of your total GNP. It was nothing. So even next day, the whole market came back, right? In Japan, it happened a couple of times, and they lost trillions of dollars. Especially the real estate is in big trouble. And Japanese, it's a booming market, but they are still going through the same period which you had in 1960s. So to answer this question, I will say in the next 4 or 5 years, you will see a lot of changes coming. You are already negotiating a new framework with Japan. It's a new framework talks going on with Mr. Clinton and the new Japanese Prime Minister, and he's from coalition. So Liberal Democratic Party is not in power. And political scientists, they know that any time when you make a coalition, coalitions are always fragile. Because there is so much diversity in terms of keeping everybody together. Look at the OPEC coalition. There are so many ideologies. Every time somebody tries to cheat and raise their prices, you know what happens. So Japanese, I will say, the next 3 years are very critical. We have to wait and see. Yes.
In the 20s and 30s, we saw a big protectionist, atmosphere in the world, and World War II followed. Are you optimistic at this point, or do you worry that we could do that again?
I think we may not go back to 20s and 30s because, again, going back to my first statement which I made, that in those days we did not have all the shock absorbers. Let me clarify what exactly I meant by shock absorbers. Shock absorbers are, let's say in your monetary system, you have a Federal Reserve System. We didn't have that. We didn't have International Monetary Fund. We didn't have GATT, General Agreements on Tariffs and Trade. All these organizations are the product of in the World War II era. So I'm very optimistic because anytime when you have a trade battle, you cannot have unilateral actions. It always backfires. Of course, you have to negotiate, and people who teach this area, they know that negotiations, they take a long time. And trade talks, the resolution has to be in the form of bilateral or multilateral negotiations. And that's why we say that by the end of this year, many countries, they are trying to conclude these GATT talks, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and I think it will help. So I'm pretty hopeful. Of course, there will be some problems. Somebody may cheat, somebody may dodge, somebody may go underground, But countries, they do that. It's pretty common. It's not new. Why? Because it may have some political motives. If I'm going for the presidency or if I want to be a prime minister, Like in Nigeria, I mean, they already had elections, and the guy who was taking care of the government, he just told them he doesn't want to leave. Okay? In this country, it doesn't happen. A president loses and you leave next day because it took 15 years. In other countries, if you lost and you tell them, no way, Jose, I'm going to stay here. So this is one of the problems we face in the developing countries. That's where the negotiation. Yes, sir.
Yeah, that's where I want to ask my question. How do you handle the problem when you already have investment in developing countries and there's political instability?
Okay.
How do you handle that?
Well, there are different strategies. One of the strategies is that you bring your economic development to that country in such a way that they feel obliged. You see, without your investment, 100 million or 200 million or 1 billion, they can't stay, right? They know that in today's world it's so interdependent. I mean, you can't just one day wake up and say, I'm going to nationalize and confiscate all the foreign assets. It doesn't happen. It did happen in Uganda, where Idi Amin one day woke up and he said, okay, all the foreigners, okay, everything is confiscated. It doesn't happen in today's world. So countries, in order to attract investment, you have to provide incentives. Just like here, in the Panhandle, Texas. How do you attract investment? You've got to show something. Somebody is not going to invest their money. If I invest $200 million, I need to have some long-term benefits. So that's one of the strategies. The second strategy is you have to collaborate with the local government. And that's where the main problem is. That's why I think I made a statement that most of the investment is not done in the developing countries because just for the sake of one thing, and that is no political stability. Once you have a political stability, it can be a booming market. Let me create a very interesting analogy. Look at Thailand, look at Malaysia, look at even Vietnam. All these countries are booming markets. Why? Because due to the political stability. Malaysian government is very good, Thai government is very good, but if you go back to Pakistan, the whole government changed last month. So it's back to square one. So how can you attract investment? Political stability is the name of the game, and if you have the right political stability, I think people will come and invest in your country. Coming from a developing country, of course, some people will say, why do you talk like this? Because you have to have your rational perspective. You really can't just have a one-way mind. Political stability is not possible. It's not easy to be achieved, and that's why all the developing countries are having problems. But I think down the road, after 10 years, things are going to change. Because as I said, when people, they know that they have to seek comparative assets and they have to seek more economic prosperity, they have to collaborate. Yes, sir.
And this free trade with Mexico, with their cheap labor, won't that hurt our laboring force here?
Absolutely. In some areas, not in every area. In the auto industry, of course, it's going to hurt really bad. And then in some areas like agriculture, in the high-tech industry, it may hurt. But as I said, after 10 years, the trade-offs are going to be such that the difficult thing is how to go through this transition. And overall impact will be that both countries. See, if you lose jobs, let's say in the auto industry, according to one of the I think U.S. government, they had planned to allocate $2 to $10 billion so that all these displaced workers can be retrained and they can be taken care of. Of course, it's a big expense, but that's why they have this 5 to 10 year period transition. Yes, ma'am.
What would they be retrained for? I mean, if there are no jobs, when a company like IBM loses and closes, thousands and thousands of jobs.
Absolutely.
And then another one is dropping jobs and jobs and thousands. What is the value of retraining when there are no jobs that you're going to find?
See,
it's a good
question. One of the problems we are facing in this recession, especially in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's the first time this thing happened. Historically, any time when you had a recession, we always had blue collar losing their jobs, right? This recession, you had a lot of white collar people. So going back to your question, this was a different recession, and where we were really not ready to deal with this white collar. That's why I made a statement earlier, and that was the new management concepts are also changing. Why? Because you are dealing with a different ballgame. You are dealing with a different situation. In some areas where people, they may have to be retrained and they may have to be maybe forced to seek different avenues. I know it's a very difficult and I don't have the right answer, but in some areas you can have the right training at the blue collar level, but at the white collar and gray collar is in between blue collar and white collar. And it's a new term we use. Gray collar people are mostly high-tech people, you know, these people who bring your Federal Express is a gray collar worker. Somebody who comes and fixes your fax machine or coffee machine, he's a gray collar. That's where the main problem is, gray collar and white collar. So IBM, of course, they have asked 36,000 more people, and Apple has asked 10,000 more. But the thing is, your economy is so big, and this is my answer. Your economy is so huge, the biggest economy in today's world, that these people will be accommodated and assimilated. But of course, it's going to take some time. How many years? Sometimes it happens in a couple of years that people, they are accommodated. And if somebody wants to do all the quantitative analysis onto this area, it can be a very interesting study. How long it takes for a white collar to change and to be accommodated and to be used in other corporations, or maybe what type of training. You see, if I'm a doctor, if I lost my job, I spent $100,000 on my education. How can I start from ground zero? That's where the main problem is. But in the high-tech industry, a lot of jobs are highly interdependent. You can move to one area and then next day you can have a little bit more training and go to other areas if you are highly qualified. I think it's possible in some industries, and in some industries it may not be possible. That's why many people, they are starting their own businesses. When you lose money and you become a white collar, and after that you are an entrepreneur. So that's my answer. Yes, ma'am.
Well, I'd like to know if in that, has the government thought about these border states that's having so much trouble with education and providing education, the tax burden on the people, and providing the medical services that my understanding from listening to C-SPAN, et cetera, they're expecting quite a glut of people to come across the borders and probably will come into these bordering states to Mexico. Is there going to be any relief from the federal government for our state taxes that we have to pay on these things?
It's a good question, and I think I'm not the right person to answer. but just let me give you my own opinion. According to this North American Free Trade Agreement, other states will tell you that there are 3 states capitalizing on this opportunity: Arizona, California, and Texas. Exactly, because this is what they say in some areas. And then they say that, the booming market and all the jobs are created. But as I said before, see, these are all trade-offs. And it all depends on one thing called economic prosperity. If you have the right economic prosperity, all these problems can be taken care of with the help of the federal government. And as I said, I'm not the expert in this area, but I don't know what to say. But of course, I agree with you that it's a big burden on the state economies, but it has both trade-offs, and I don't know, this is my answer. Yes, sir?
Somebody was worried here that the industry and everything, IBM and General Motors will move to Mexico. Ross Perot said, suction job, right? He said, but I don't believe so, because if we lay off and give all the jobs down south of Mexico, they'll produce all those cars and computers, IBM computers there. Now, who's going to buy them here? So the big corporations will have to think twice before they decide to some grandiose plan to move everything down there. On top of it, if they don't have a skilled labor there, like we have here. It takes a good mechanic to put assemble a car and all that stuff. Example, Yugo.
Absolutely.
It was assembled by, it was actually, it's a good car, it's a Fiat.
That's right.
But it was assembled, but people have no knowledge, no technical skills, and this is what happened.
That's right.
First they made a Yugo with 2 doors, then they make a 4-door Yugo called Wigo.
And then there's one car available from Eastern Germany.
But that is why it failed, there was no skilled labor. That's the same thing, so they have to think twice before they
Let's have one more question.
Yes, sir.
As an individual, how do I get involved so I can profit on this? I mean, do I, my capital is limited, the whole thing. How do I get involved? Do I get in a group? Do I try and go on my own or what? To start capitalizing on this before it gets, too far.
Well, Paul, would you like to answer?
Write him a check.
I think he answered that very well. Go to your public library. Figure out what you can do. Come to the International Club. Talk to people. What do you want to do? What can you do? Is there a market for it? I wouldn't be afraid of tackling almost anyone, as long as you're willing to study, read, and be realistic. It's amazing what you can do.
And one more thing I would like to mention, it depends on your product and where exactly you want to sell. So you start from your library, but you also call your local small business bureau, and you call your U.S. Department of Commerce, Washington, D.C. They have 800 numbers available. And you talk to that desk, let's say Mexico, if you want to sell your products to Mexico, talk to the Mexican desk. And they have some experts, and their job is how to help you. And they will send you a huge amount of literature. And ask your, any operator, they will give you. But we do have all the numbers available. I'll be happy to, it should be, that's why we have created Panhandle International Business Forum. And the purpose of this forum is to have a monthly meeting, so people, they bring their ideas and we are here to help. And it's a sort of network. That's my answer. Yes, sir.
Just for gentlemen's benefit, I was watching about a month ago National Geographic television, and they had a program called Along Volga River. And they followed the river, Finally they came to town, I forgot the name of the town, but that was off limits before to foreigner because where the armament was being fabricated. And now, for just out of blue, there's an American couple from Arkansas. They're running a fried chicken place, similar to Kentucky Chicken, but their own. And so we just came down here. We started this business. We love it. They're making it real good, and I have it on the tape at home.
I think I've told a number of you the story of walking into the supermarket in the Holiday Inn in Beijing, China. They had a big office building, hotel, and a supermarket. A lot of products in all the rooms, and on one shelf was a bunch of 1-gallon jars of distilled water from Oklahoma City. Let's get Syed.
If they know how to cook Mexican food. Mexican restaurant in Bangkok, I've seen 2 in Madrid. These were, one of them was started by a Chinaman in Bangkok for the American servicemen. The other one was an American from San Antonio who married a Spanish woman and started 2 Mexican restaurants in Madrid. And I understand from reading that Mexican food is on the rise every place. They like it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And I'm sure you can answer any questions. And I want to go back to college.